She walked into the office and asked,
"Where can I buy a dad? I have $1 to pay."
Princess, I can be your dad for free.
The billionaire CEO's world stopped. It was a quiet Wednesday morning when Donald Blake stepped through the glass doors of his company's headquarters. As always, he looked perfect. He wore a pale blue suit that caught the soft morning light just enough to show power, not show off. His brown hair was neatly styled, every strand in place. His blue eyes, sharp, cold, and hard to read, moved across the lobby the way they always did, noticing everything and feeling nothing. To most people, Donald Blake was intimidating. The kind of man who walked into a room and instantly controlled it. In business circles, he was known as careful, unemotional, and impossible to reach. People respected him. Some feared him. No one truly knew him. That was how he liked it. Control meant safety. Routine meant survival. But that morning was the start of something that would change everything. Donald was halfway across the wide marble lobby, giving a short nod to his assistant, who stood ready with his usual morning briefing, when something stopped him. Near the reception desk, sitting quietly on the floor, was a little girl. She was small, maybe 5 or 6 years old. She had long blonde hair that curled slightly at the ends and a white dress that looked like it had once been neat and pretty but was now a little wrinkled. Over it, she wore a denim jacket that was clearly too big, like it belonged to someone else before her. She hugged a small backpack to her chest. It was covered in cartoon stars and sparkles. Her sneakers were worn and scuffed, like she had walked a long way in them. But none of that was what truly caught Donald's attention. It was her face. Her eyes were wide and bright, and they were the exact same deep blue as his. She wasn't crying. She wasn't scared. She wasn't making any noise at all. She just sat there, calm and patient, like she was waiting for someone. No one else seemed to notice her. Executives hurried past, busy and distracted. The receptionist kept glancing between the girl and Donald, clearly unsure whether to call security or pretend nothing was wrong. Donald stopped walking. Something tight and unfamiliar squeezed his chest. It wasn't logical. It wasn't something he could explain. He walked toward the girl slowly, then crouched down in front of her. He tried to smile, but it felt stiff and awkward on his face. "Hey there," he said gently. "Are you lost?" The girl looked up at him and answered calmly, with a seriousness that didn't fit her age. "Where can I buy a dad?" For a moment, Donald didn't understand what she had said. He blinked, stunned. That wasn't something people heard every day, especially not from a child. A few people nearby turned to look, confused and uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "What did you say?" She didn't repeat the question the same way. Instead, she looked straight at him and said, "I want to buy a dad. I saved coins. I need one." Donald felt his throat tighten. This was a man who had handled billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. He had stood calm during hostile takeovers, lawsuits, and brutal press conferences. But standing in front of a little girl asking to buy a father, he didn't know what to do. Then something inside him shifted. He looked at her again, really looked. At the steady look in her eyes. At the quiet determination on her face. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a tantrum. She wasn't lost. She had come here on purpose. The people in the lobby watched closely, waiting to see what the powerful Donald Blake would do. The silence grew heavy. Then, before he could stop himself, he said something he never thought he would. "I can be one for free." The girl didn't smile. She simply reached out, wrapped her tiny fingers around his index finger, and held on. "Okay," she said. "But if you're my dad, you have to help Mommy. She's sick. And we don't have any money." That was the moment his heart broke completely. The lobby went silent as Donald slowly stood up, still holding the girl's hand. His assistant looked shocked. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. For the first time in years, Donald Blake walked away from the boardroom, the meetings, and the perfectly controlled life he had built. He let a child lead him, step by step, out of his building, onto the sidewalk, and into something unknown. And he didn't look back. The drive across the city felt slow, not because of traffic, but because every second felt heavy. Donald sat in the back seat of the car. His driver glanced at him through the mirror, curious but silent. The little girl sat beside Donald, her small hand still tightly holding his finger, as if she was afraid he might disappear. She didn't talk much. She stared out the window, watching the city change, from tall glass buildings to old brick houses and worn-down shops. Her name, he learned, was Celine. When he softly asked where they were going, she answered simply, "Home," and gave an address Donald didn't recognize, but his driver did. It was in one of the poorest parts of the city, a place Donald hadn't visited since he was a teenager, back when life had been simpler and things like power, distance, and emotional walls hadn't mattered yet. As the car turned onto a cracked street, memories stirred inside him. A schoolyard, a small grocery store, and suddenly he felt more than familiarity. He felt fear. He looked at Celine more closely. Her hair, her eyes, her quiet voice. Everything about her felt strangely close, like a memory from a life he had locked away long ago. The car stopped in front of a two-story building with peeling paint and a rusted staircase. Celine jumped out of the car and tugged his hand urgently. "This way," she said, already climbing the stairs. Donald Blake followed her up the narrow staircase. The hallway was tight and dim, and it smelled faintly of damp wood and old carpet. The sound of their footsteps echoed softly as Celine stopped in front of a door on the second floor. She reached into her small backpack, pulled out a key, and opened the door. Inside, the apartment was quiet and dimly lit. A few toys were scattered across the floor, and a folded blanket lay neatly on a worn-out couch. The space was small but tidy. The kitchen was clean, yet almost empty, as if only the basics were there. The walls were covered with old photos and drawings clearly made by a child. Stick figures, hearts, and smiling faces. Then Donald saw her. Lying on a futon near the far window was a woman. His heart nearly stopped. She looked up when the door creaked open. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Her face had changed, thinner, paler, but her eyes were the same. Hazel brown, wide with surprise, and pain, and recognition. She tried to sit up, but her body was weak. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and unsteady. "Donald." He couldn't answer. For a long moment he just stood there, staring at her, stunned, his breath caught in his chest. Slowly, carefully, he walked closer, as if moving too fast might make everything disappear. "Sophia," he whispered. She nodded slowly. A tear slid down her cheek. "You're really here." Donald sank into the chair beside her, his mind struggling to understand what he was seeing. Celine stood nearby, watching the two adults in silence, confused by the heavy air in the room. Sophia lifted a trembling hand and gently brushed Celine's hair behind her ear. "I never thought I'd see you again," she said quietly. "How is this possible?" Donald asked. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't know how," Sophia replied, her voice breaking. "You left for London. You changed your number. You were gone. I never got a call. A letter. Nothing." She paused, swallowing hard. "I was scared. And then it felt like it was too late. When I realized I was pregnant." Her voice shook. "I didn't want to ruin your life." Donald turned and looked at Celine. She was sitting on the floor now, calmly pulling a small toy from her bag. "She's mine," he said slowly. "Isn't she?" Sophia nodded. The truth hit him like a tidal wave. He had a daughter who had walked into his office and asked to buy a father. A daughter who had grown up without him. A daughter raised by a woman he had once loved, and somehow lost. Overwhelmed, Donald stood and paced the small room. "How long have you been sick?" "A little over a year," Sophia said. "It started small. Tiredness. dizziness. Then they found the tumor. And you didn't ask for help? I didn't think you'd care. Donald stopped pacing. Those words cut deeper than anything else. I never stopped caring, he said firmly. I never stopped thinking about you. Sophia closed her eyes, trying not to cry. I couldn't find you, she whispered. And even if I did, you were so far from this life. I didn't think you'd even remember me. Donald returned to the chair and sat heavily. He looked at her again, really looked, and saw not just a sick woman, but someone who had fought for years to survive. Someone who had raised their child alone. Someone who had been left behind by more than just him. I'm here now, he said quietly. And I'm not leaving. Sophia looked away. She doesn't know everything, she said. Just that her dad wasn't around. She knows more than you think, Donald replied. She came looking for me. They sat in silence for a long time, broken only by Celine's soft humming in the corner. Donald reached out and gently took Sophia's hand. It felt cold and fragile, but she didn't pull away. You need care, he said. Real care. Not this. He looked around the small apartment. You're coming with me. Both of you. I can't just leave, Sophia said weakly. I have bills. Treatments. I'll take care of everything, Donald interrupted. All of it. Sophia looked at him closely, her eyes narrowing. Why? Because I should have been there, he said. And because I'm not going to let my daughter lose her mother. Not after everything. She didn't answer. But when he carefully lifted her from the bed, she didn't resist. As he carried her out of the apartment, Celine skipped behind them. She didn't understand the full weight of what had just happened, but she knew, deep inside, that something big had changed. Something good. Donald didn't take Sophia and Celine to his glass and steel condo overlooking the city skyline. He knew it wasn't right. That place was beautiful, but cold and empty. Too perfect. Too lifeless. Instead, he brought them to his private estate just outside the city. It was quiet there, surrounded by trees and soft hills. Wide windows let sunlight pour in, and a fireplace sat unused, having burned maybe twice in the last 10 years. The house had been meant for weekends that never came. But now it finally felt like home. As they entered through the side door, Donald watched Celine's eyes widen. She didn't run or shout. She simply looked around, taking everything in. The tall wooden staircase, the gentle hum of the house, the clean smell of lemon polish and cedar. She held her mother's hand until they reached the guest suite. The bed was covered with soft sheets Donald had asked the housekeeper to prepare that morning. Sophia slowly sat on the edge of the bed, still pale and weak. Gratitude showed on her face, but so did uncertainty, like she didn't know how to accept help anymore. Donald knelt in front of her, resting one hand gently on her knee. You'll stay here as long as you need, he said. Doctors will come. Everything is taken care of. You don't have to fight alone anymore. Sophia looked at him exhausted, but there was a small spark in her eyes. I'm not used to people doing things for me. I know, he said softly. But let me do this. She nodded slowly, her shoulders relaxing just enough to show she believed him, at least for now. That evening, Donald sat alone in his study, quietly watching the security monitor. On the screen, Celine was curled up beside her mother on the guest bed, fast asleep. Her small body rose and fell gently as she breathed. Sophia lay still, one arm protectively around her. Donald hadn't spoken to anyone all day about what had happened. No meetings. No calls. No emails. His assistant had sent more than a dozen messages, but he didn't open a single one. For the first time in years, work didn't matter. His mind kept replaying Celine's voice. Where can I buy a dad? He had built a life far away from children, emotions, and anything unpredictable. He had trained himself to avoid them. And now, faced with all three at once, he barely recognized the man he was becoming. But he liked him. Later that night, after Celine had fallen deeply asleep, Sophia sat with Donald by the fireplace. A soft blanket was wrapped around her shoulders, and she held a warm cup of tea in both hands. Her voice was quiet, careful, as if she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. "I didn't know if I should tell her who you were," she said. "I thought maybe I'd missed my chance." "You didn't," Donald replied gently. "She found me before either of us even had a chance." Sophia smiled faintly. "She's like you in that way," she said. "Quiet when she needs to be. Brave when it matters." Donald looked at her, regret heavy in his eyes. "I missed so much." "We both did," Sophia whispered. "But you're here now." They didn't talk about what had gone wrong before. The distance. The timing. The unanswered messages. The mistakes. There would be time for that later. For now, they sat in silence, listening to the fire crackle softly, as if afraid that too many words might break the fragile peace growing between them. The next morning, Donald made breakfast. It was a disaster. He burned the eggs, spilled orange juice across the counter, and somehow set off the smoke alarm. Celine thought it was the funniest thing she had ever seen. Sophia laughed so hard she started coughing, and for a brief moment the room felt warm and alive, like a family had always belonged there. That afternoon, doctors arrived. They examined Sophia carefully and with respect. Donald stayed close the entire time and made sure she didn't have to sign a single form. He wanted her focused on healing, not on money or paperwork. The diagnosis hadn't changed. She still needed long-term care. But now the treatment was the best available. And more importantly, she wasn't alone anymore. Donald began rearranging his life. He changed his schedule, canceled trips, delegated responsibilities. Grace, his longtime assistant, finally called him and asked flatly, "Is the world ending?" "No," he replied, watching through the window as Celine played in the backyard, creating a game out of sticks and pine cones. "It's just starting." Grace paused, then said quietly, "You sound different." "I feel different," Donald admitted. In the evenings, they sat together as a family. Donald read stories out loud, sometimes messing up the voices so badly that Celine laughed until she couldn't breathe. Sophia slowly grew stronger. She took short walks through the house, sat outside wrapped in blankets, and began writing in a journal again. One day, Donald caught her writing. She looked up and smiled. "I'm not just surviving anymore," she said. "I'm remembering who I am." Donald didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, quietly amazed. The woman he had lost. The child he had never known. The home he never realized he needed. All under one roof. It felt fragile but real. And for a man who had built his life on control and distance, that truth grounded him more than anything ever had. As the weeks passed, the house slowly changed. It stopped feeling temporary. Shoes were left by the door. Laughter came from the kitchen. Life filled the rooms. Not the quiet echo of wealth, but the sound of people settling into each other's lives. Donald had never lived like this. His homes had always been spotless and silent, perfectly arranged, carefully controlled. Now there were art supplies on the table, tiny socks in the laundry, and children's shows playing softly in the background. Celine was gentle and quiet, but somehow she filled every space. She didn't ask permission to belong. She just did. Sophia improved faster than the doctors expected. The treatments were working, and her stress had faded. Donald made sure she had everything: medication, therapy, and time to rest. He even set up a reading space in the sunroom just for her, filled with the poetry books she used to love in college. He tracked down a rare first edition of her favorite author. The day she found it waiting for her, wrapped in linen and tied with a ribbon, she cried. Not because of the book, but because someone had remembered. For Donald, everything was new. He was used to results and solutions. But now he was learning how to be present. He learned that teaching Celine to tie her shoes took longer than signing $1 million deal. That bedtime stories required patience. That it was okay to mess up and laugh at himself. It humbled him. And somehow it made him stronger. On nights when Sophia felt well enough, they sat together on the back porch after Celine went to bed. They talked softly, not about business, but about the past. The missing years. The lives they had lived apart. Donald asked questions. Hard ones. And Sophia answered honestly. She told him about working 2 jobs. About skipping meals so Celine could eat. About wanting to call him, but always stopping herself. "I saw you on TV once," she said quietly. "You looked like a stranger. Powerful. Untouchable. I didn't know where I fit anymore." "You didn't have to fit," Donald replied, his voice steady. "That world was never real without you in it." Sophia didn't speak. She simply reached for his hand and held it tightly. Not as romance, but as understanding. As forgiveness. Meanwhile, Celine grew more comfortable with each passing day. One afternoon, while handing Donald a drawing she had made, she said it casually, without thinking, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Here you go, Dad." Donald almost dropped his coffee. For a second, he thought he had imagined it. But she was already looking up at him, calm and certain. He didn't correct her. He didn't ask questions. He simply took the paper from her small hands and smiled, so softly that it surprised even him. The drawing showed the 3 of them holding hands under a giant yellow sun. Above their heads, written in crooked blue letters, was one word: family. That evening, Donald tucked her into bed and stayed longer than usual, sitting at the edge of the mattress. Celine looked up at him with sleepy eyes and asked, "Are you going to be here in the morning?" "Always," he answered without hesitation. And he meant it. Not just as a promise, but as a choice. For the first time in his life, Donald Blake wasn't chasing the next deal, the next title, or the next goal. He was choosing something harder. Being a father. Being a partner. Being the kind of man who showed up when it mattered. He had built empires. Now he was building something far more fragile and far more valuable. A life. The first real test of that new life didn't come from illness or lawyers or business problems. It came in a very ordinary way. A parent-teacher meeting at Celine's preschool. Donald had never been to anything like it before. The invitation arrived in Celine's backpack, a crumpled piece of paper smudged with marker stains and crumbs. Sophia was resting that day after a long treatment session, and Donald offered to go in her place, thinking it would be quick and simple. He wore a navy blue sweater instead of a suit. He left his phone in the car. And he arrived 10 minutes early, unsure of where to stand or what to do. He wasn't used to bright fluorescent lights or bulletin boards covered in colorful handprints. He didn't know how to make small talk with other parents. Sitting on a tiny chair made him feel awkward and oversized. When the teacher, Miss Howard, greeted him with a warm smile and motioned for him to sit, Donald carefully folded himself into a chair clearly not made for someone over 6 feet tall. She opened a folder labeled Celine Blake and began talking about her progress. How she was quiet but very observant. How she always helped clean up without being asked. How she once gave her snack to a classmate who forgot theirs. Donald listened closely, nodding like it was a serious business meeting. Then Miss Howard hesitated. "There's something else," she said softly, tapping the folder. "She told me something last week." Donald looked up. "She said her dad used to live in the clouds," Miss Howard continued gently. "But he came down when she asked for him." Donald froze. A lump rose in his throat. "I just thought you should know," the teacher added. "Whatever you're doing, it's working. She feels safe. And that matters more than grades or charts." When Donald returned home that afternoon, he sat in his car longer than usual, staring at the house. It used to feel like just a building. Now it felt alive. The front door flew open, and Celine ran out to meet him. There was paint on her cheek and one ribbon loose in her hair. She wrapped her arms around his leg like she had been waiting all day. When he picked her up, she rested her head against his shoulder without saying a word. He held her tightly, breathing in the smell of markers and apple juice. Inside, Sophia was feeling stronger. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a few papers spread out. Forms for a part-time writing program she was thinking about. She looked up at Donald and knew immediately something had happened. "What is it?" she asked gently. Donald set Celine down on the couch with her toys, then turned back to Sophia, his voice filled with wonder. "She said I came down from the clouds." Sophia blinked. "She did." He nodded. "I never thought I'd be someone's safe place." "You are," Sophia said, reaching for his hand. "Even when you weren't here, she felt you somehow." Donald looked down, overwhelmed, not because he doubted himself, but because it mattered so much. For the first time, he was starting to feel worthy of the life he was living. Later that week, Sophia had another checkup. This time, Donald went with her, not just as support, but as her partner. They sat side by side in the waiting room, flipping through old magazines and sharing quiet jokes. When her name was called, he helped her stand and walked with her into the room. The doctor was careful but hopeful. The tumor had shrunk. Her body was responding well. If things continued, she might not need another intense round of treatment. Sophia leaned back, letting out a shaky breath. Relief and exhaustion filled her eyes. Donald exhaled too. "You're going to get through this," he said quietly. Outside the clinic, under a wide gray sky, Sophia looked at him and said, "I didn't think I'd ever have anything to hope for again." "You do now," Donald replied. "And I want to be part of it." That night, they cooked dinner together. Donald tried. Sophia supervised from a stool, laughing when he oversalted the pasta and spilled sauce everywhere. Celine sat at the table drawing again. Another picture of the three of them, hearts floating above their heads. She handed it to him seriously. "This one's for your office, so you don't forget us when you work." Donald looked at the drawing, then at the little girl, then at the woman across the kitchen. And he felt peace. Not the kind that came from success, but from being present. He folded the drawing carefully and placed it inside his briefcase. Not because he might forget, but because he never wanted to forget what truly mattered. Fall arrived quietly. The sunlight softened. Evenings grew cooler. The trees around Donald's home began to turn orange and red. On their walks, Celine collected fallen leaves and pressed them between the pages of her coloring books, carefully saving each one like it mattered. Life inside the house began to move with a rhythm of its own, no longer rushed by emergencies or sudden changes. Their days were shaped by small, gentle routines. Mornings were filled with quiet chatter, warm toast, and the occasional spilled juice that made Celine giggle instead of cry. Afternoons echoed with laughter from the backyard, where Donald had finally agreed to build a small wooden playhouse. He told himself it was practical, but the truth was simple. Celine had asked so sweetly that he couldn't say no. Evenings became their favorite time. As the sun slipped behind the trees, the three of them gathered for dinner. The meals weren't perfect. Sometimes they were messy. But they were real, and that mattered more than anything. Sophia's health continued to improve. She began walking without help, climbing the stairs slowly but with growing confidence. Color returned to her cheeks. Her voice, once weak from exhaustion, grew stronger day by day. She laughed more. She spoke more freely. And slowly she started writing again. Donald turned one of the guest rooms into a small study just for her. He filled it with journals, books, and a desk facing the garden, a view that always seemed to calm her. It became her safe space, a place where she could remember who she was before life became only about surviving. She once told him that being in that room felt like meeting herself again. Donald was changing too. Quietly, deeply. He still worked, but not the way he used to. Meetings were shorter. Late-night calls were ignored. Weekends were kept free. Grace, his assistant, had stopped asking if he was okay. Instead, she started sending parenting tips and short messages like, "Celine's class has a field trip. Don't miss it." He never replied to those messages. But he never missed a single thing. One night, after Celine had gone to sleep, Sophia found Donald sitting alone in the kitchen. A cup of tea sat untouched in front of him. His eyes were distant, lost in thought. She sat beside him without saying a word. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and honest. "I spent years thinking power meant being untouchable," he said. "I thought if I controlled everything, I'd be safe. But this..." He gestured around the room. "This is the first time I feel like I'm actually living." Sophia smiled at him. Not with pity, but with understanding. "Because you finally let yourself belong to something bigger than yourself," she said. "And you didn't lose anything. You gained everything." Donald reached across the table and gently held her hand. He hadn't planned to fall in love again. He thought that part of his life was over, locked away with old memories and regret. But now, sitting across from the woman he once lost and the child they never knew they were raising together, something steady took root in his chest. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't chasing success to escape emptiness. He was still. And in that stillness, he felt whole. That weekend, they took a trip to a nearby lake. Nothing fancy. No strict plans. Just snacks, sweaters, and Celine's endless questions. They rented a small boat and drifted across the water for hours. At one point, Celine lay across their laps, eyes closed, completely at peace. Sophia rested her head on Donald's shoulder. Without thinking, he kissed the top of her hair. No words were needed. It was one of those rare moments where everything important was felt, not said. Later that night, as Celine slept in the back seat on the drive home, Sophia turned to him and asked softly, "Did you ever imagine your life would look like this?" He let out a quiet laugh. "Not even close." "Do you miss the old life?" she asked. "No," he replied. "I only wish I'd found this sooner." As the car moved through streets lined with trees and soft shadows, they drove forward into a life neither of them had planned, but both knew they were meant to build. And for Donald Blake, a man who had spent his adult life chasing a sense of arrival, the truth finally became clear. This ordinary, imperfect, and beautiful was it. He was already home. The first snow came earlier than anyone expected. Before Thanksgiving, the city woke up covered in white. It surprised everyone except Celine. She ran to the window with a loud scream of joy, already pulling on her boots, even though she had them on the wrong feet. Donald laughed as he helped her into her puffy jacket, fixing the boots while she hopped around impatiently. From the doorway, Sophia watched them. A wool scarf was wrapped around her neck, and a small smile rested on her face. She still got tired easily, but the color had returned to her cheeks. Her laughter came more often now, lighter than before, as if a heavy weight had finally lifted from her chest. That morning, they built a snowman in the front yard. It was crooked and uneven, but perfect to Celine. They gave it a carrot nose and, to Donald's surprise, one of his designer ties. Celine laughed so hard she almost fell into the snow. Donald didn't stop her. In fact, he made sure the tie stayed on the snowman so the neighbors could see it. Inside the house, the air smelled like cinnamon and fresh coffee. Sophia had started baking again, something she hadn't done in years. Mixing dough and kneading bread seemed to calm her. Soft music played in the background as the kitchen filled with warmth and the feeling of a home rediscovered. Donald, who once ordered meals from five-star restaurants without thinking twice, now knew the names of baking tools he had never heard of before. And he didn't mind at all. Each day brought new routines, small rituals, things he never imagined himself doing, but now couldn't imagine living without. Still, not everything was easy. One night, after Celine had gone to sleep and the house had grown quiet, Donald walked into the study. Sophia was sitting in the armchair with her journal open on her lap. Tears were sliding silently down her cheeks. She tried to wipe them away quickly, but Donald knelt beside her and waited. He didn't rush her. He didn't interrupt. After a moment, she whispered that sometimes she still woke up afraid. Afraid this life was temporary. Afraid one bad scan could change everything. Afraid that one day Donald might decide this life was too small for him. Donald reached up and gently touched her face. He looked straight into her eyes, steady and sure. "There's nothing small about this," he said. "You and Celine gave my life meaning. No success ever did that." He told her he wasn't leaving. Not now. Not ever. And if fear came back, they would face it together. Sophia didn't answer right away. But she leaned into him, and that said everything. Later that week, something unexpected happened. Donald received a call from a non-profit organization that helped single mothers with housing and legal support. They had noticed his recent anonymous donations and invited him to speak at their winter fundraiser. At first, he said no. He wasn't ready to explain what had changed. He wasn't ready to share his story. But Sophia encouraged him. She reminded him that his story wasn't just his anymore. That if it helped even one person step forward for someone in need, it was worth telling. So he agreed. The night of the fundraiser, Donald stood on a small stage in a modest auditorium. He wore a simple suit. No tie. He didn't prepare a speech. He just spoke. He told them about a little girl who walked into his office one morning and asked to buy a dad. He told them how that single moment shattered everything he thought he knew about life. How it led him back to a love he thought was gone forever. He spoke about the quiet strength of a woman who raised their daughter alone. About second chances. About choosing to show up. When he finished, the room stayed silent. No clapping at first. Just stillness. Then applause slowly began. Soft, then stronger. It wasn't just for him. It was for what the story meant. Hope. Change. Redemption. When Donald returned home that night, Sophia met him at the door. Celine was already asleep. They stood together in the hallway for a long moment. Donald pulled Sophia close and said quietly, "Thank you for believing I could be more than what I was." She smiled, resting her forehead against his. "Thank you," she replied, "for becoming exactly who we needed." That night, as snow fell gently outside and the world moved on without noticing, their home stayed warm, full of stories of love, of second chances. And in the quiet space between words, something unspoken finally settled into place. They were no longer rebuilding. They were already whole. Spring returned slowly, melting away the cold days and the long quiet nights. With it came a gentle truth. Life was no longer being rebuilt. It was simply being lived. Outside the Blake house, trees bloomed in soft shades of pink. The air smelled like wet earth and fresh beginnings. Laughter returned to the garden, light and free, as if it had been waiting all winter for permission to come back. Celine had grown taller. Her shoes no longer slipped off her heels when she ran. Her drawings had changed too. They had more color now, more detail. And more people. Almost every picture showed 4 figures. Herself, her mom, Donald, and a tiny baby with a smile as big as the sun. With the bold honesty only a child could have, she began asking if they could give her a little brother or sister. The first time she asked, Donald nearly choked on his tea. Sophia just laughed. Her eyes shone in a way they hadn't a year ago. Their days felt settled now, but never boring. There was warmth in their chaos and comfort in their imperfections. Donald still split his time between work and home, but everyone at his company had accepted that his priorities had changed. He was now the kind of leader who left early for school plays. The kind who planned meetings around doctor appointments. Once, he even paused an important shareholder call because Celine ran in excitedly to show him a butterfly she'd found in the garden. Strangely, the company had never run better. Donald no longer felt the need to control everything. He didn't micromanage. He didn't rush. He had nothing left to prove. Numbers were no longer where his fulfillment lived. Sophia returned to writing with quiet strength. Her essays about motherhood, resilience, and second chances began to spread online. People noticed them not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. A small publisher reached out with a book offer. When Sophia showed Donald the contract, his hand shook, not from fear but from pride. "This is just the beginning," he told her. She smiled and said, "I already have everything I need." The manuscript grew slowly, written between nap times, evening walks, and cups of coffee that often went cold. Celine sat nearby, coloring or asking questions about the story. Sophia answered every one. She never brushed her daughter aside, even when her thoughts were deep in revision. One Sunday morning, under a soft sun and falling petals, Donald took them both to the park. It was the same park he had driven past for years, always too busy, too distracted to stop. That day, they brought a blanket, food, and no plans at all. Sophia lay in the grass with her eyes closed, soaking in the warmth. Celine chased ducks near the pond, laughing freely. Donald sat back and watched them, feeling the weight of his old life slip further away. He used to think peace was boring. Now he knew it was the most extraordinary thing he had ever felt. That evening, as the sky turned orange and the air grew cool, they walked home slowly. Celine skipped between them, holding one of each of their hands. She began humming a song she'd made up. Donald listened closely. She sang about finding lost things, about families you didn't know you had, about dads who come down from the clouds. Donald looked at Sophia. She was already watching him. She silently mouthed one word: miracle. And this time he didn't disagree. When they reached the house, Sophia stopped at the front door. She turned to Donald and took a long breath. Then she asked him the question they had spoken about months ago. Did he still want something permanent? Something legal? Something that put into writing what had already become true in their hearts? Donald didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. He hadn't known exactly when the moment would come, but he had always known it would. Inside the box was a ring. Simple and elegant. Not flashy. Just like her. Sophia didn't cry right away. She placed her hands gently on his face and kissed him once, softly, like sealing a promise. From the steps, Celine clapped excitedly. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she could feel that it was something big. Something beautiful. That night, they shared stories over dinner. Stories from the past. Dreams for the future. And it felt as if the walls of the house were listening, holding those moments safely inside. Months later, they were married. The wedding was quiet and warm. Just close friends. A backyard lit with soft fairy lights. And Celine tossing flower petals with more excitement than anyone could control. Sophia wore a dress she had chosen herself. It wasn't extravagant. Just something that made her feel strong and beautiful. Donald, dressed in a tailored gray suit, looked at her like the world finally made sense. They spoke vows they had written themselves. Not perfect words. Just honest ones. And when the ceremony ended, Donald lifted Celine into his arms and brought her into their first dance together. There wasn't a dry eye anywhere. The life they built didn't come from perfection. It was shaped by missed chances. By broken paths. By pain that still lived quietly in some corners. But it was also shaped by forgiveness. By choosing to show up. By love that stayed. Even when it had every reason to walk away. Donald once believed happy endings were for other people. Now he understood something different. Real happiness wasn't the end of the story. It was the part you fought to build after everything could have fallen apart. And this messy, beautiful, everyday life was the ending he never knew he deserved. This ending is powerful not because everything turns out perfectly, but because it turns out honestly. It isn't about erasing the past. It's about healing from it. There are no grand speeches or dramatic twists. Just steady love, slow trust, and real connection. The billionaire CEO doesn't just discover he has a daughter. He discovers the kind of man he wants to be. And that change feels earned. Sophia's forgiveness isn't instant. Donald's growth isn't easy. That realism gives the story its weight. And Celine, the innocent thread holding them together, reminds us that hope often comes from the most unexpected voices. In the end, this is a story about second chances. Not the kind given freely, but the kind fought for. And in that fight, a new kind of wealth is found. Family, love, and something money can never buy. That is the kind of ending that stays with you. Now, viewers, we want to hear from you. What part of this story touched you the most? Which moments stayed with you after the ending? Do you believe second chances are worth fighting for? Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments section below. Your voice matters, and your perspective might inspire someone else who needs hope today. Thank you so much for watching and reading this story with us. If you enjoyed it, please like this video, share it with your friends and loved ones, and subscribe for more emotional, meaningful stories like this. Your support means everything, and we can't wait to see you in the next story.